and I would like to introduce you to our presenter, Kimber Larson. Welcome, Kimber.
Hi, thank you so much, Arlen, for having me and the introduction. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I know 3 o'clock is a very challenging time as any school employee or school leader. So I'm glad you're here with me today, so that I can share both my story and experiences, but also those of others who have experienced similar losses and their reflections on who they are as leaders. And so we'll spend a little bit of time today talking through those topics. And I do hope to be able to hear from some of you throughout our time together. So, I want to start out with who I am and what my story is as a school leader. I started out as a sixth grade teacher in an elementary school setting. So, I some years taught two subject areas, some years taught all of the subject areas. It kind of depended on our classes at the time. I loved being a sixth grade teacher, but I knew I wanted to give something else a try. So I became a second grade teacher in that same building, got some experience at the primary level. And up until that point in my life, my real focus was school and being the best teacher that I could be. My husband getting married, starting our life, and I was really building who I wanted to be as an educator just from my experiences in the classroom. But that quickly changed. And so before I dive into my story, just a trigger warning, I am going to talk a little bit about my loss and some other losses of other leaders who've shared their stories with me. And so if pregnancy loss story is something that is triggering for you or difficult, you're welcome to just mute. Join me on the next slide if you would like, but it is a part of my story and a part of what I have to share with you today. So as I was teaching second grade, it was time to start our family. My husband and I experienced a miscarriage with our first pregnancy, devastating loss. How do we move forward? Something unfortunately so many families are familiar with. We were very lucky, after that to quickly become pregnant again. We were expecting our first daughter, Charlotte Ann. She would have been 11 this upcoming year. But then I quickly and unexpectedly found myself as a bereaved parent. We lost our Charlotte, we believe, to an accident at 39 weeks pregnant, a fluke umbilical cord accident. And so very quickly, my entire life was flipped upside down. My greatest blessing and expectation and start to the life that I thought we were going to have was ripped out from underneath me. And I remember my doctor saying, in the hospital that night, she's like, I feel like we just pulled the rug out from us. And I think that was the best way to put it. And so, that moment and that grief and that underlying experience of who I am now since that moment has shaped me in so many ways, both as a parent now, as a leader, as a person. And it really got me thinking into how does that experience shape more than who I am as just a mom. And so that was my first experience with motherhood, was having a miscarriage, then losing our daughter, Charlotte, stillbirth, right when we thought we would be having her. Then I became a preemie parent. We are so blessed and beyond grateful to have two beautiful living children, but their starts were rocky and traumatic and fast. So I have two preemies that are now beautiful elementary school age children. And so as I was growing as an educator, getting more experience as a teacher, living through these life experiences, those really formed and shaped who I was, both at school and both at home. After welcoming our son, I became an instructional coach. We welcomed our daughter, who of course had to join her brother in the NICU for a couple weeks as well. So we continued to live out, that start to our life. And I started as an instructional coach to really find my footing as a leader. How do I want to serve others? What do I believe leadership means? I then moved into an assistant principal role. and now I am serving as a principal. I started out in a large suburban district or medium-sized suburban district as a principal in an intermediate setting. I loved every second of that role. I loved my district, loved my place. But the reason I share this picture is that I all of a sudden found myself applying for the open principal position at home at my children's school. And so now I am so beyond lucky to serve as the momsipal, as they like to call me, principal at the school with my children, with my friends' children, and the community that I grew up in. And so that part of my story and that deep level of connection that I have with the students and the families that I serve really impacts some of the things that I'm going to share with you today. So that's a little bit about me. That's my backstory and why I have these insights and to share with you today. So I do hope to get a little bit of engagement in the chat just so I know who I'm learning with today. I really hope that you are inspired by some of the things that I share, feel some validation in your practices. So if you can just quickly share for me your name, where you're joining us from what seat are you making an impact? I'm in the principal seat, and that's how I serve my community and my kids every day. But if you could share where you are making that from. And because we're talking about emotional intelligence, how are you feeling? How are you feeling this afternoon? I'll be honest, I had a lot of feelings of overwhelm today at school. There was a lot happening. It's the honeymoon of the start of the school year is over. But right now, I'm feeling a lot of gratitude to have this opportunity to share with all of you. So if you can drop a little bit in the chat for me, where you're from, what your seat is, who you are, and how you're feeling today. Paulette, thank you so much for joining. Uneasy, I have felt that as a principal and an assistant principal like you. Thank you for sharing that. Bev, thank you so much for joining us. Clarissa, thank you. A bit overwhelmed. Fellow principal, yes, I feel that with you. Thank you for sharing. Christine, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. My heart and soul are with you. Um, Thank you for joining, and I hope that you find some connection and validation as you join in with me today. I see some familiar faces. Thank you, Dan and Megan and Nick. Dawn, thank you for joining. Mike, thank you. Feeling great. That's awesome to hear. Welcome. Lindsay, familiar face. Thanks for joining. So relaxed. I feel that. So thank you all for joining. It looks like we have quite a mix of building leadership. We have some district level leadership, some classroom leaders. So I really appreciate all of you sharing that with us. Feeling excited, Dad's 84th birthday. Well, I hope you feel some excitement and some inspiration today as we learn together as well. So, what I really hope for you today is that we first get a sense of what emotionally intelligent leadership is. And so, what does that look like in your practice? How does that ground in the theory of emotional intelligence? And then I want to share with you some insights from leaders who have faced unexpected loss. And what are some of the insights and the life experiences that have shaped who they are as a leader so that, those of us who have lost know that we are now part of a club that nobody wants to be a part of. We don't want anyone else to join us from where we sit, but we have experiences and perspectives that can be helpful to others. And then I hope you also have an opportunity to reflect and share and think about how do these lessons apply to who you are as a leader and what are some things that you can take back and apply to just strengthen yourself and your own practice. So I would venture to say, for based on what everybody does and what you have shared in the chat, that you got into education, into educational leadership because of your heart. You love what you do. We get into teaching because we love kids, or we love our content, or we love serving our community. And so I often find myself having conversations with other leaders or with my staff about, why am I so exhausted? Why am I constantly thinking about these things? Why does it hurt so much when I'm face disappointment at school? And that's because we lead with our heart. We got into this profession from a space of love. And so that feeling of fulfillment and gratitude and purpose is important in our day-to-day role. And we have to feed that and fuel that and be really cognizant of the work that we do. But oftentimes we probably feel like this. And so if you want to just give me a thumbs up or a yes in the chat if you feel this slide the same way I do today. I was the parent complaint manager for one parent today, and I was the parent counselor for another parent today. I was the compliance manager for our ROE visit this afternoon. And so we as leaders face so many roles in what we do, but we have to remember that while all of this is important and while all of this is a part of what we do from our seat as a classroom teacher or a building leader or a district level leader, we have to spend time and we have to focus on why we got into what we did and our hearts and our feelings over what we do. And so that's where emotional intelligence comes into play. How do we understand how we are feeling? And so a lot of those feelings we had today, some of us feeling great, some of us feeling overwhelmed. How do we manage those? How do we support ourselves and support others? So when you think about emotions and emotional intelligence, especially in leadership, can you go ahead and share that with me? What are some of the phrases in the chat that come to mind for you when you think about how you manage your emotions in your workplace, how you understand those? So if you can take just a quick second in the chat, what does emotional intelligence mean to you when you think about leadership? And I saw a couple people react to that previous slide. I think we all feel that often. So I'm glad that you connected with that as much as I did. So again, what is emotional intelligence to you and from your seat of where you lead? Mike, thank you. Awareness, absolutely. That is a huge part of emotional intelligence, not only awareness of yourself, but of others as well. And we know in education that others is little kids, it's big kids, it's parents, it's community members. So what does trying to understand where someone's coming from? Absolutely. Seek to understand before we speak. We know they have a story. Management of hearing all sides. That's a huge weight that we have as educational leaders, that we have to take the perspective of everybody around us. Absolutely. Thank you, Christine. I'll give you just a couple more minutes. And so as we start talking about emotional intelligence and really grounding ourselves in what that means, we are going to focus on one model of emotional intelligence. There are many different models. There's so much written in the literature around emotional intelligence and positive psychology, but I'm grounding today in the foundational theory of emotional intelligence. The first that really came out and said, understanding our emotions and who we are is an intelligence of itself. It's something that can be learned and grown over time. It can be measured. And so that's the Mayer and Salovey model. And thank you. Yeah, managing your emotions in your building, even though it's directly impacting your family, right? Having to compartmentalize and in those different roles that you live in your life. Understand your own emotions. I love this one. React to others appropriately. Thank you, Dawn. I feel like that's, as a elementary school principal, that's my number one conversation with kids, reacting appropriately to the feelings we're feeling. And so today, when I speak about emotional intelligence, just to give us the same language here, I'm talking about the Mayer and Salovey model. And so it's a four-branched model of emotional intelligence and explicit, discrete skills that we have that show that we can both understand, like you shared with ourselves and others, the feelings that we have. And the first is that ability to perceive emotions. That's perceiving the signals that we get from our body, from our environment, from others about the emotions we're feeling. So when you are feeling hot in the face, or your heart is starting to beat faster, we feel like we have clenched fists. That's that ability to perceive, I'm feeling angry right now, or I'm starting to shake and feel withdrawn. I'm feeling anxious about the unknown that's ahead of us. And so that first level is not just perceiving how you are feeling, but especially as a school leader, recognizing those in others, recognizing them in students, in staff, in your colleagues, in parents and community members. And once we have that ability to perceive and take in all of that data, emotions are data, they're telling us what's going on inside of us and others. We can also have a more complex application of that. So maybe we can identify how we are feeling or perceive that emotion. We're learning to perceive those feelings and emotions in others, but we also then have to apply it to behavior. Can we perceive the emotions that are coming through in behavior? And if you're an elementary school or any school leader at that building level, you know that that's a lot of what you do in your work with kids, perceiving their feelings out of the behavior that they're showing, being able to understand feelings through art and music. And then also, that complex application is discriminating between feelings. There's a difference between, am I angry or am I disappointed? Angry is there's an injustice, something is wrong, it's against my values. Or am I upset with an unmet expectation? And so, in that first realm of emotional intelligence, that first branch, it's that ability to be able to perceive what the emotions are. And again, just like you shared, it's within yourself and in others. And so then in our second branch of emotional intelligence, it's understanding that emotion. It's understanding why they are feeling the way they're feeling, why you are feeling the way that you're feeling. And so understanding the relationships between people, the relationships between feelings, being able to interpret or understand the context. So the best example was one of the last days of school last year. One of my fourth graders, all geared up to leave elementary school and go on to our middle school, who came in throwing a fit, slamming the door, stomping into my office because he was angry, right? I could see that anger. I could see the clenched fists. I was reading his body languages, but to understand the context of he was wrongly accused at recess and he didn't do anything wrong, which the beauty of cameras to be able to see that he didn't do anything wrong. But to understand that context for him, a student that we had worked so hard on all year to make good choices and was having a great end to the year, and to understand that's infuriating and that's anger coming out in that context of recess. He was unjustly accused. And so my ability to recognize that and understand where he was coming from, and then let's utilize that feeling to make better decisions. That's the ability to understand emotions. Also, understanding how different emotions relate. What felt like injustice and anger later shifts to disappointment and how he reacted to that. Understanding is also that ability of cohabitation. And so, those of you that have shared with me in the chat that you've experienced a loss, you know better than anyone that sadness and grief and happiness can live side by side, or I can feel disappointed and grateful at the same time, or knowing that emotions transition, they go in phases. I can go between anger to disappointment to despair back to anger again. That's that ability to understand. And again, like you shared, both within yourselves and with others. The third branch is the ability to utilize. So we know emotions are data. It's how our bodies are feeling and how we're reacting both to our own mind and thoughts and also the stimulus around us. And so when we utilize emotions, that signals how we respond. And so I think as a school leader, this is what I use the most often is, how is my disappointment in this experience or this staff meeting going to now frame my work and my decision making moving forward? And so an emotionally intelligent leader can do those things. They can understand what they were feeling, why they felt it, to then prioritize their next steps or prioritize action or response or no response. And so using your emotions, using those feelings that you have to for cognition, to take perspective, is that third branch of utilizing your feelings. Only through utilizing your feelings, understanding them, can we reach empathy. Can we really take someone else's perspective and understand and feel a feeling that they have felt before? And only by utilizing it can we act with compassion. Compassion is empathy with action. And so if we are using our emotions for good, we're using it for change, we can show that ability in that third branch of the model that we're talking about today. And then finally, it's the ability to manage. And some of you related to that in the chat as well. Are we open to feelings? Do we know that it's okay to feel however you need to feel? And I probably say that 10 times a day to both adults and to kids. Being able to manage your emotions and having that skill of emotional intelligence means that you are open to feeling the signals that you feel, or open to seeing and perceiving the feelings of others. But are you able then to either engage or detach? Or what I like to say, are you able to compartmentalize those feelings? Are you able to monitor? Are they lessening? Are they growing? How am I going to respond when I feel disappointed? Can I compartmentalize it and move on with my day? Or do I need to use a coping skill to talk through that disappointment? Do I need to call a friend and vent and get it out and talk through and process so that I can move on? And then only when we're open to those feelings and we feel and we can engage or detach, can we then evaluate, was that an appropriate emotional response? How am I going to regulate it? For me, it's talking with my close friends or my mom. I get to talk it out and then I can get back to where I need to be. And how are we going to reason with that feeling? How are we going to justify? And so, as we talk a little bit more today, I want you to think through these branches, these four areas of emotional intelligence that really guide how we use those feelings to be better leaders. Mark Brackett is the founding director of the Emotional Intelligence Center at Yale. And so if your school districts utilize Ruler as your SEL curriculum, Mark Brackett's the director of that. We just started Ruler implementation in our school, and our staff, myself, our kids are very excited. But I think he puts it in perspective here when you think about all of those stressors in your day-to-day life as the leader, some of those things that I shared. Each moment is a choice. No matter how frustrating or boring or constraining or painful or oppressive our experience, we can always choose how we respond. And that's where that level of emotional intelligence comes in. How are we understanding our feelings and those of others? How are we responding so that we can lead the way that we want to lead? And we also know there's a lot of research to show us that emotionally intelligent leadership has a positive impact on cultures and on schools. Schools with an emotionally intelligent leader have greater levels of teacher efficacy. And we know that collective teacher efficacy is one of the most important factors for student learning. Our teachers have to believe that they can make an impact, and they can believe they can make an impact when they have an emotionally intelligent leader. Leaders with these strong skills build more empathy. They're able to manage the power dynamics between their leadership colleagues, between parents and teachers, between staff members, between kids. There's greater learning and innovation in schools with emotionally intelligent leaders. Staff have greater job satisfaction. So to work with a leader who can identify how they're feeling, understand it, and respond appropriately is going to make it a happier place to work. Also, your group is going to develop emotionally competent group norms. The culture of your building, the way you do things is impacted by the skills of the leader. There's more trusting relationships. You're better able to navigate conflict. And for many of you who shared your roles, that's probably a big part of what you do. I know as a building principal, a lot of my day is conflict between one or two different groups, and my job is to lead them through that. And so when we have emotionally intelligent leadership, we're building better schools, and we are better able to meet the needs of our kids, and we're better equipped to be the type of principal that we want to be. And so I've done a lot of sharing and talking, and I'm hoping we can engage through the chat. I know sometimes that feels different, but I really want you to take a moment to reflect and share. How has your life and your leadership impacted your emotional skills? What moments have you faced where you've responded in a way that makes yourself proud? What leadership moments have you faced where you look back and say, I wasn't regulated before I responded to that, or I didn't seek to get their perspective and understand their feelings first? So just take a minute to reflect. It's a vulnerable thing to share, but if you're willing to share some of your experiences in the chat, I would love to hear from that. So again, how has your life and leadership impacted your emotional skills? I know just today I had a student in my office for the day, disciplinary, and I had to take about 4 or 5 walks to take a breath, regulate that feeling of overwhelm so I know that I could serve him better and be a better support system to the student today. All right. So hopefully you're thinking through, some experiences of your own. Where have you shown those emotional intelligence skills? Where have you not? Absolutely, Bev. Thank you for sharing. Learning your triggers. Your life experiences are going to trigger feelings that you experience. And so really understanding what is that and how can I respond appropriately, and where is that feeling stemming from? Absolutely, Colette, thank you. Managing your emotions, identifying what are you feeling, and then how can we regulate it? And that goes both ways, right? Managing emotions isn't just making the bad feelings go away, but if I'm feeling excitement, how am I going to maintain that? Or if I'm feeling disappointment, how can I initiate a new and better feeling? Those are all manage and coping skills. Dan, thank you so much. You had to help guide the district through losses, learning so much about yourself in those situations, absolutely seeing the strength in others. Christine, thank you so much for sharing that. It's such a powerful moment, and such a vulnerable and honest thought. The patience that your daughter had that you didn't have after losing her. You're better at understanding your feelings. Absolutely. And seeking that help. Christine, thank you so much for sharing. And that really segues into this understanding of, we know that emotional intelligence are skills. They're things that we can learn. They're things that we can strengthen. They're things that we can apply. And so you can learn those in practice. You can read about emotional intelligence. You can go to different workshops and understanding, what you can do, what leadership actions you can take. But we all know that life shapes who we are. And that one of those universal life experiences is grief. All of us are going to face loss. Some of us, unfortunately, face devastating, unexpected loss that changes our entire world. And so that universal experience of grief can also build those skills. And as Christine shared, as I've shared, as Colette is sharing, making sure that we know that our experiences shape who we become as leader and our ability to share those skills. So grief is the emotional, behavioral, physiological reactions, the cognitive reactions to the death of a loved one. And out of that experience of grief and that traumatic experience, we can learn lessons and we can grow from what we've experienced. And so, as a leader, how have I shaped my beliefs, my actions, my ability to connect with others through the grief that I've experienced? And so, some of these lessons, we find ourselves answering this question of now what? And so, those of you who've experienced loss, and thank you for sharing that, those of you who've experienced other senses of loss, you experience something traumatic, and all of a sudden it's over, and you find yourself feeling alone and knowing, what do I do now? Like, I was expecting to come home from the hospital with a baby, and instead I didn't. And you sit there with that feeling of now what? Now, as a mom, as a wife, as a teacher at the time, and now as a leader, what am I going to do and how am I going to move forward? Because we know I'm going to learn how to manage my feelings. I'm going to learn to read the feelings and emotions of other people. And that's a big task when my day job is this. And so if you've experienced loss or you know someone who has, they come back to a job where they're feeling strained. They come back to this position where they have to fill all these roles, but we know that we have to take care of our heart. We have to take care of the feelings that got us here and the drive to join and lead in the position that we're leading. And so in my dissertation study, I spoke with other school leaders who've experienced an unexpected loss, the death of a spouse, the death of a child while they were an educator, the death of a student in their school. And so when they shared their stories with me of how they responded and how they lead now that they've experienced that loss, their stories reflect the idea of emotional intelligence. They reflect how we can take those skills of understanding others and move forward to be a better leader. And these areas of human connection and insight with others, becoming service minded, and knowing that life continues to move on, that feelings can cohabitate, and I can continue to grow and live and lead in different positions that I'm in. And so the first area of human connection, there's some really powerful moments from their story. And as a school leader, how are you cultivating that sense of human connection in whatever seat you're in? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're there. We're connecting with people all day long. And so one of these principals who shared their story with me shared that there's nothing more humanizing than for others to be able to relate to you, even if it's through grief. So knowing that building that connection is serving her leadership. Every single principal that I talked to about who did you become after this loss and how do you lead talked about their acknowledgement of humanity, that as a leader, they know they are doing important work for the greater good of humanity and who we are. And one principal shared, she lost a student. He was somebody's baby boy. We've got to sit back and always think that's somebody's child, and that drives her work every single day to be able to relate on the deepest level of what we do. We're connecting with other humans and we're leaving them better than where we found them. And so learning from their lessons and their belief in connection and knowing that whatever position you're in, district level leadership, building level, classroom leadership, that what we do and how we connect with others is greater than just the work. It's greater than the marketing that we have to do and the conflict navigation and the schedule creation. But who we are in leading other people is more than just the principle, that I can be myself, I can connect with you, and I can leave somebody better than I found them. And so my challenge for you is, how can you take these lessons that other leaders have faced and learned and cultivate that in your role? So in what ways are you actively cultivating these moments of connection, knowing how critical they are with your staff, with your students, with your families? If you want to reflect on that, share your thoughts. In what ways are you actively cultivating that? And so you're welcome to join, put that in the chat or think through, but we know that these principals who have lost and reflected on their skills, they know that every day in their job, they have to connect with others. All of these leaders who have lost, and through my own experience, we know that emotional insight matters. When we show up to do the work that's just greater than making a master schedule for the building or greater than evaluating their instructional skills, we have to connect by having that level of emotional insight, applying those skills of emotional intelligence. And so the first part is becoming in tune. So I challenge you to think, how in tune are you with your teams? How in tune are you with what they're feeling every day? One principal, after losing his spouse very unexpectedly, shared, you know, this forced him to become acutely aware of the battles that everybody else could be facing and trying to use that to understand why we all may be doing what we're doing. So are we assuming positive intent? Are we seeking to understand and become in tune with those that we serve before we make judgment? Are we making sure that we're connecting, we're becoming in tune with ourselves, becoming more thoughtful, deliberative, more reflective? And so, what astounded me most when I talked to all of these leaders was that they all talked about understanding others. They had just faced the most unexpected loss of their life. They're learning how to grow after losing, and their focus was, how are other people feeling? Because they have that unique understanding of how they show up and the emotional skills and struggles and challenges that they bring every single day. And so that's when, as a building leader, and something that I faced pretty acutely today after some difficult parent conversations, is understanding the power of a moment. And so when we know what emotional intelligence is, and we know why it's important, and we know that these stories of principals who face the unimaginable share that we have to become in tune, we have to be aware of who we are and the people that we serve. And so I challenge you to think about today. So if you can take a moment of overwhelm today, a difficult conversation today, did you harness the power of that moment to pause, identify what you or the other person was feeling, seek to understand where they were coming from? Did you use your own regulation skills? Did you help them regulate? And then how did you use that moment to change your decision making? How did you prioritize your next steps or your next step? That's the power of a moment. That's being emotionally intelligent. That is showing that insight into other people. And so that's something I challenge you to do every day. And as a leader, it's that walk out to your car. It's that moment in your car before you head into your house. It's the moment in your office where you shut the door, to really harness the power of that time. Another common theme that a lot of principals have shared that are reflecting on their emotional intelligence skills, and especially after their loss, was becoming service minded. And so we can learn these lessons that after facing traumatic loss, that focus of serving others came to the forefront. And it was in two phases. It's one, being grateful for the service they received. I know, my husband and I's relationship was never stronger and than it was when we lost our daughter, because we were both grateful for the service and the care and the strength that we gave to each other. And when a principal came back to school after losing a student unexpectedly at a weekend party, she came back and said, what got me through that first day were all of the people that showed up to help, all of the people from the other buildings that came to be there to provide services, to call and check in. And so facing the unimaginable can teach us what's the most important, and it's service to others, being grateful to the service that they provided, and also reinvigorating our sense of our calling to serve. We get into this position because of what we love. We love kids, we love service, we love our content. And so finding that again and finding that purpose that everybody needs you in your role. And how are you going to give? How are you coming from a place of servant leadership? When we serve others, it cultivates a sense of purpose in our life. And that purpose cultivates our sense of fulfillment. And we know that that's why we do what we do. That's why we get into education, is that feeling of fulfillment for others. And the last final theme or message that these leaders have shared with us is that life moves on. And so the one thing that you hear a lot if you lose a child or a spouse is how is she moving on? I don't know how you're living, right? We hear versions of that. I don't know how you are doing what you're doing. And I know from my own experience, it's always, what else do I have? Life has continued, and now I'm faced with my only option is moving forward. And so that sense of now what, like, how can I still move forward and live with purpose? Because I've survived the unimaginable. I didn't think I could survive, but here I am. So, how do I continue to forge forward? So, as a leader who's faced loss or who's learning from others who have faced loss, how are you taking those challenging moments that you may experience or your staff or your students may feel? And how are you walking alongside them? And how are you continuing that movement forward? And then I know that this comes out in who I am and my story of what kind of leader that I want to be, that I lead from a place that honors who I was before I lost Charlotte or who I am as Charlotte's mom. So I love children. I love caring. I love being a caretaker and I want to serve. And so every day when I walk to school, I want to be the principal and the caretaker that I would want for her and that I didn't get to give to her and I didn't get to raise with her. But now I get to serve as a principal who provides that comfort and support and encouragement. And so all of these leaders have found that they have purpose and they know that they can lead with legacy moving forward. Because at the end of the day, that we know that what we do comes from our heart and it takes a lot of skill. We have to understand our feelings of what we feel, who we are, where does that come from, how do we regulate that? Um, because at the end of the day, that's why we do what we do. And so, as you reflect on transforming your own tragedy or connecting with others who have faced tragedy or just being a better leader and applying those skills, I really hope that you find ways to cultivate that connection, to bring emotional insight, to take that power of a moment every day in your work, to become more service minded, which is both serving others and finding that piece of gratitude of service that others have given to you, and knowing that we're all moving forward. And how can you walk alongside those that you're serving, or how can you yourself continue to move forward? And so, as we wrap up today, I hope that you gained some validation. I hope that as we shared these stories and emotional intelligence skills, that there were things that were validating to your current practice. And I also hope there were pieces or parts of stories that inspired you to action, inspired you to do something new or strengthen a practice that you already have. And so, and I also hope you're either still feeling good or you're feeling a little better than when we started. So I really appreciate all of your time today. If you want to just put in the chat this wrap up for me, I would love to hear how you're feeling now, what was validating to you, and what inspired you as we shared. Mike, thank you so much. I'm glad you joined. Dan, thank you. Validates the importance that we are in the people business. And especially as a building leader, we are in the business of little people, big people, and that's sometimes the hardest part of being a principal is to switch from 5-year-old problems to 35-year-old problems in the same hour. Thank you, Megan. All right. So thank you everyone for joining again. I hope there was something that was validating or inspiring to you, new skills. And I hope to see you all down the road somewhere.
Kimber, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today and how this tragedy can be transformed into being an emotionally intelligent leader. Appreciate all the conversation happening in chat as well. So thank you, participants, for joining this afternoon and spending your time with us. Still opportunity for open questions as well. If you've got any questions for Kimber, you can type those into chat. Great. Thank you, Dawn, for that message. Oh, sorry about that. I'm going to go ahead and stop the webinar recording.